Hi, I'm Rob Price, and it's great to be back for a new season. Welcome to Futurize.
Hi, I'm Claudine Adeyemi-Adams. I'm the founder and CEO of Earlybird. Earlybird is the AI operating system for frontline casework, essentially. So, what we do is we build software that supports those on the front line who are delivering public citizen services, support services across a number of different areas, from employment support to justice-related support services, mental health programs, things like that. We help those individuals who are delivering those services on the front line to do so more efficiently and more effectively, and in a more human-led way by plugging into the workflows that take them a lot of time and the parts of the work that they don't enjoy as much. So that's me and us.
Cool. And Claudine, we kind of met at the London AI Hub recently when we both presented a public sector showcase. And the thing that stood out for me apart from you brilliantly handling the technology failure at the time, but the thing that stood out for me was we've just not got the capacity to be able to serve citizens across the country in the numerous different types of case handling. And you were very much focused on making that better, but very much thinking about what do those individuals need? How do you, because AI can be scary, and you were kind of trying to very much firmly kind of make it additive and helping. But how did you get into that? What was the thought process when you suddenly thought, this is my vision for Early Bird?
Good question. So, I where can I start? I've been in the sector for a long time. So I used to deliver support services through government contracts through an organization that I set up myself. And so have a lot of experience, and particularly because it was quite a small organization, of doing everything end to end, right? So designing that service and submitting the bids and winning those contracts, but then also involved in the delivery and being on the front line and supporting individuals to overcome the various different challenges that they're experiencing and progress them towards achieving the outcomes that they're trying to achieve. So that was kind of the nature of the casework that I was doing. Largely kind of outcomes looking at how they can move towards work and get into work, but as part of that, looking at how you support them to overcome trauma, how you support them to resolve housing related issues, challenges that they're facing at home with domestic violence and things like that, people with quite severe neurodivergent needs and how they can kind of manage work alongside their conditions. So really quite complex stuff. So that was kind of my foray into the sector. However, I professionally was a lawyer for best part of a decade, and so started doing this work semi alongside still practicing, and then eventually kind of went into it full time after leaving law. But the thing that really drew me to doing that work in the first place was, unfortunately, my own circumstances were such that I had to rely heavily on those types of services. So I actually left home when I was just 16 years old. I have had experiences of, being in and out of the job centre, relying on benefits, needing support with housing, needing support with mental health as a young adult, being in that situation. You can imagine a range of different things I might have had to go through. And so for me, it was really realizing that that lived experience that I had, combined with that professional experience that I had and domain expertise of then actually delivering those types of services, could kind of marry the two and start to see where some of those friction areas were. And if I reflected back on some of the challenges that I experienced, could start to see, well, actually, if they had more time to have spent with me, that service that I received would have been better. If they, had tools at their disposal that enabled them to kind of access better resources, I would have then had been the beneficiary of that improved service. And then obviously seeing it from the side of delivering as well, and seeing how challenging it can be to deliver some of those government commissioned programs. And so essentially, long story short, marrying those two experiences together to kind of spot those opportunities for innovation and build to improve the experience all round.
I think, in a sense, having listened to you talk about it, having listened to you present, the passion that you bring to that, it kind of makes sense. It reminds me of a conversation I had with a guy called Stephen 6 months ago when he presented, and he'd been using AI tools actually from a very personal kind of situation around abusive relationships. And it was in part time, but it was in part bringing knowledge together to enable, through his kind of solution, Linda, that he's produced, to enable a better service to be provisioned because kind of people at the point of need had the information to hand that they should have to make a decision. In the work you're doing, is it more about giving time back? Is it more about getting information to point of decision? What are the primary drivers that you find that people need?
Yeah, so it's a mixture of things. We started with it being around well, we actually started with it being around how can you surface better quality information to that caseworker so that they're in a better position to deliver um, high quality support more quickly. And so that's things like, our AI agent going off, having a conversation with that service user, really extracting an in-depth understanding of them, their challenges, their needs, and so on, and being able to present that back to the caseworker so that when that appointment is happening and they're doing the actual work of support, they've already got that kind of rich profile of them. Um, Consequence of that is obviously it speeds things up, so there is that time saving. And we kind of doubled down on that the time saving piece, and not from a perspective of saving time just for the sake of saving time, but how you can benefit from being able to reallocate that time to other things. And so that's where you then get a lot of the benefits of being able to deliver a more human first service because actually you've got more time to just have a chat with someone and be an ear. Sometimes it's just people just need someone to listen to. And so if you're kind of, you've got a heavy caseload and you're just kind of working through all of that casework and you've got all these targets you need to hit and boxes you need to tick, you don't have time to do a lot of the human part that would actually be the kind of icing on the cake for these services and really, really transform someone's life potentially. So there's that side of things. But also there's other types of activities that some of these services could be engaged in that they just don't have time to do that would also add additional benefit. So if I go back to an employment support example, one of our incredible customers, CTEC, one of the things that they were found that they were able to do as a result of saving some of that time on the front line was having those individuals then be involved in setting up a job club for their participants that they're supporting. And so being in a position where you can now suddenly create these opportunities for people to then connect to jobs has then it meant that they can then improve those outcomes. So it's things like that. It's kind of spotting those opportunities to reallocate time to improve the overall service. Is kind of the main kind of thing that we look at.
And have you found in the work that people are, or where people are using it, has it begun to have an impact in the elapsed time to process a case, if you like? Kind of because I think a lot of people focus around productivity, which is important. I mean, giving people time back. But I think one of the things that I see across different types of businesses, different industries, is things take so long kind of to happen. And if we can find a way of shortening that decision and execution process for the thing that needs to be done, then there's kind of potentially huge benefits for that, for especially for the person who needs support, needs help at that point of need.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And there's different parts of a caseworker's workflow that we plug into that enables them to get to those positions much faster, right? So enabling them to get to a position where actually it's quite clear very quickly what the kind of goals are that that individual that they're supporting should be working towards, or drawing up an assessment. Which otherwise, yeah, would just take weeks, or delivering any kind of output from a conversation, surfacing, recommendations and things that enable them to kind of make those decisions much faster. So yeah, so that's absolutely a huge benefit of the underlying kind of artificial intelligence technology that we're able to leverage in this day and age, which just wouldn't have been possible 5, 10 years ago, right? So
So I'm conscious that in a lot of these cases, there's a lot of sensitive information, sensitive conversations,
Mm.
personal data. I'm guessing that kind of the user isn't simply kind of typing into ChatGPT, what shall I do now? So could you tell us a bit about how do you reassure your customers that they're entirely safe to use the system to deliver what at heart are sensitive case services?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously, because of the nature of the work that we do, we've had to think about that from the outset. And so from the very beginning, we adopted privacy by design principles. So kind of looking at data minimization, looking at, how you can make sure that you're only kind of capturing the personal data that's even needed to deliver the service. Looking at how it ties in with security as well and how you're protecting that data. And so we built out quite robust processes around all of that from the outset. And then have gone off and got various accreditations and things like that. So ISO 27001, Cyber Essentials Plus, all of those types of things, to really make sure that we're being held to account for how we look after that data as well. Um, and then it's kind of more about thinking about the user experience as well. And so how, for example, during onboarding and when we're kind of delivering training to our customers as they get started, we support them to really think about a lot of these things and how it's set up, um, and how they should have the conversation with anyone that's using the service around what this service is helping them achieve and how the data is processed and so on, and building in the functionality within the product to enable consent to be captured really easily, to enable those audit trails, and so on. So yeah, we've done a lot of work around data protection, but also security. And I think, particularly with my legal hat on, I think that risk profile has always kind of been paramount to make sure that we are, yeah, dotting the i's and crossing the t's, I guess, from a pure legal obligation perspective, but also it's just at our core in terms of we have a responsibility here, right? To make sure that we're protecting those service users and making sure that we're handling their data properly. So it's always been really important.
And you've touched on user experience, which was actually kind of the next thing that I wanted to explore because that's a core part in my experience of that whole trust piece. If the way in which I interact with the system, it itself is going to determine the confidence that I've got in it doing things for me in the right way. Now, how do people engage with Earlybird from a product point of view? How do they interact with it? And what have you found has really kind of benefited in terms of driving adoption and engagement?
Yeah, so in terms of the how piece, so first and foremost, our product is largely for the caseworker, right? So that frontline staff member has access to our portal, has access to the different features and tools within that, and they can, kind of engage that way, record their appointments, spin up, additional documents, review kind of reports that have come through from the engagements with our conversation agent, and yeah, all of the things they need to do they can do within that portal. For the service user or program participant, their engagement is either in conversation with our conversational agent, which is a kind of voice-powered, multilingual agent that they can have that conversation with, to share information, insights that the caseworker needs at any particular time. And then obviously when they're kind of in those appointments, where the caseworker is using our software, for example, to record that conversation, that will be a way that they're engaging as well. Or if they're using our software to generate an assessment or a CV or those types of things. So they'll kind of receive it secondhand. In terms of building up the trust, for us, the approach that we took was always to be customer-led and user-led. So what that looked like from the outset was before even building, doing some extensive research. So really understanding what are those pain points, what are the challenges, how can we add that value to improve the experience of delivering these services. And that works both ways, right? So that's with the caseworker, but also speaking to people who would be users of those services as well to understand how they would receive it all. And then it's co-design. So as we're building, making sure that the relevant stakeholders that are going to be using our technology have input, can play around with things, give us that feedback. And what we've done is basically just continue to adopt that, right? So we've got a product now that's out in market and that's going really well, but it doesn't end there. We're constantly innovating, we're constantly iterating even on what we've already built. And a lot of how we go about those iterations are based on the feedback that we're getting from our users essentially, and from those caseworkers who we build really, really strong relationships with. We are open and transparent about what our software can do, what it can't do, how to, connect with us to feed back in what's not working, what is working, what you'd love to see, and then delighting them with those things. So there's been a number of instances where we've had caseworkers coming back to us and saying, this is so great. I would love if it could do this. And then within a week, it does that thing. And then you're able to go back to them and say, you asked, here you go. And so that really builds up the trust, from our perspective, which is exactly what we want to do. We want to build something that's valuable to people, and is actually going to change the way they're able to deliver these services. And so if you imagine if you're in their position, you go from never having had an experience with us before to having an incredible onboarding and training experience. You're receiving training from people that really understand what you do and what you're trying to achieve. You start and then you experience the magic within minutes, frankly. So your first interaction, you're suddenly getting all of your case notes in the format that you need them in and things like that. So you're already kind of in that journey of, okay, this is actually kind of game changing. And then on top of that, you receive a service that means that you know that you can add value. You can continue to get more and more value, by continuing to use the product and give that feedback, and the loop continues. So that's basically been our approach, which has worked really, really well. And yeah, trust is one of those core values for us as well as an organization. So everything that we do is around how we can make sure that we are building that trust, but also demonstrating that we are to be trusted with something that's really, really a critical component of our society.
And I guess a voice interface is, well, I mean, in many ways, it can't be simpler because you just talk to it. Um, but of course, it's not simple, is it? Because multilingual, multi-accents across kind of very diverse country from the UK point of view. I mean, I remember talking to an organisation that was doing voice AI in contact centres and said, "And you do Welsh, don't you?" And of course they didn't because they weren't UK based at the time.
Yeah.
So how's that experience been? Because I guess of all of that, accents kind of can be the most challenging.
Yeah. So yeah, it's been really interesting. I think it's something where we didn't have the luxury of ignoring that, right? So the nature of what we do means, and particularly in the UK, where you've got so many different cultures, people from different backgrounds, people that speak so many different languages, and frankly, a lot of the services that are delivered by our customers in these spaces. There's a disproportionate number of people who don't speak English as their first language, who rely on these services or are in areas where, they may have, I guess you can call it a strong accent, but that's from my relative right to London. So who have strong accents that need to feel heard as well. And so from the outset, we had to really do that extensive work of testing across a whole range of different accents and dialects. And then once we kind of got English sorted and the various kind of accents within that, then moving into languages as well, working with partners to yeah, to basically have them involved in that process as well, and continuing to kind of iterate on the underlying models that we're kind of leveraging to make sure that that piece was handled, because ultimately for us it's an inclusion piece, right? So we need to make sure that these services can be accessed by anyone, and if they're plugging in our technology to enable that access, we also need to make sure that those individuals can access. And it's the same, even beyond that, with, you mentioned it's voice powered, right? So we're voice first, but it's multimodal. So we have to acknowledge that, not everyone feels comfortable or is able to have a voice-powered conversation, and so you can have a text-based conversation. And do you know what I mean? We always have to think from a design perspective. If we design it in this way, who might we be excluding? And I think it's very difficult, I think, to ever get to a point where you can cover everybody, and in every scenario. And so a good example that I always come back to is, unfortunately, in the UK, there are still huge parts of the country where people either don't have digital devices or don't have access to good internet and things like that. And there's literally nothing we can do about that, right? I can't supply the devices, I can't improve Wi-Fi access. And so, yeah, there's always going to be some people that need a slightly different fallback rather than having to rely on a technology like ours to be able to access that service. But yeah, it all comes back to inclusion and accessibility.
It's I was going to say it's fantastic to see that focus on both. I still find it weird that when I started my career as a graduate, a certain UK bank told me I wouldn't be able to get a job there unless I changed my accent.
Oh,
So being
God.
able to support multiple kind of accents is just a critical thing from my perspective. Now, I've spent a lot of my career kind of working into public sector, providing technology solutions into public sector
Mm.
in big organizations. But and the procurement process can be a challenge. And it can
Can be. It
especially be a
can be, Rob.
challenge,
Yeah.
especially for smaller organizations who are just starting out. So how's that been? Because I mean, the getting on the right frameworks, being able to kind of be the person to be or the solution to be able to be bought isn't so easy for a smaller organization setting out.
It is not easy at all. Quite to the opposite. So it's been a steep learning curve. I would say that much. So even being in the space for a long time, I hadn't obviously could have done it from a perspective of technology, and didn't have much of a knowledge around all the different frameworks and how these kind of processes work. I think what's been useful for us is that we started with outsourced providers of these services. So it allowed us to be kind of slightly one step removed from the pure kind of public sector procurement process, which I think was helpful, particularly as a kind of smaller organization, and kind of just getting started. And so our interaction with government departments is kind of more around the due diligence and the security checks and things like that to make sure that we can be deployed on their contracts, which is also a challenge and extensive, but it means that you don't get the complications necessarily of procurement. And then we've kind of moved, as we've grown, moved into kind of that more procurement piece as well. So being on identifying and being on the right frameworks, whether that's kind of AI DPS or G Cloud and those types of things, so that you're available there and kind of still building. I think what people don't appreciate is that you do still need to kind of build the relationships and do the sales piece in the ordinary way, even though it's then just leading to
Yeah.
going through a procurement exercise, right? And so yeah, it's not as straightforward as we're on this framework, and so this tender's come out and we're just going to bid cold. You still need to kind of do some of the kind of legwork. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey. But I don't. I think there's been some changes to try and make it easier for smaller companies, and SMEs, I guess, um, to be procured. So if you look at like the Procurement Act and things like that, I personally haven't noticed a massive change just yet. I think we're still waiting to kind of see the benefits of those changes, and to see if that will actually flow down to real change on the ground. But yeah, so far for us, it's been kind of leveraging the frameworks in conversations when we're having those sales conversations, so that you know that you can then go to X framework to procure us, and that kind of thing. That's kind of the way that we've approached it.
And I think I've certainly found, well, both over recent years as a smaller organization and indeed in the past as a larger organization, there are partners that can be good partners and there are partners that can be very frustrating partners. It just, it often depends on the people and the personal relationships. It comes back to your point. You can't just rely on a framework magically happening. you still have to sell the concept. You still have to have somebody wanting to consume your product, wanting to make it happen, and partners that are recognizing the value of you in their ecosystem.
Mm.
Um, how have you found that that's, are you finding that the majority of your growth is driven through those partner relationships, or are you kind of having a multi-sales channel approach to maximize the work you're able to do?
Yeah, I would say the latter. So kind of more multi-sales channel. We haven't kind of doubled down on just looking at kind of partnerships and integrators and things like
Yeah.
that. It's been a little bit broader than that at this early stage.
And thinking about the future and continued growth, because I guess, I mean, even if you just looked at local authorities across the UK, then that's a huge market in terms
Yeah.
of the need of what you do.
Yeah.
Um, but but equally, selling to however many hundred different authorities there are takes a lot of time and effort. So how are you thinking about the next couple of years? What does that look like in terms of the type of organizations that you're able to focus on, able to serve? And is there some ambition beyond the UK, or is the UK firmly your target space at the moment?
Yeah, good questions. So for us, we're looking at the market relatively broadly in terms of that growth opportunity. So kind of approaching the different segments, but simultaneously. So whether that's kind of provide outsourced providers, whether that's local authorities, and because we cut across a range of different support services, it almost kind of creates different sectors within all of that, right? So we're yeah, cutting across all of those. And then yeah, obviously looking beyond the UK as well. So busy year or two ahead of us because we're doing multiple things at the same time. But yeah, we're doing it in a relatively measured way. So yeah, that all makes sense. And to be honest, a lot of it is looking at inbound opportunities rather than, we're launching in 4 countries with 4 separate teams on the ground. So yeah, so doing it in a bit of a measured way from that perspective.
In a sense, I think it comes back to any for any young organization, then you have to follow the money and follow the opportunities that present
Yeah.
themselves,
Yeah.
because it is about keeping that momentum going. Um, one of the things that I was really keen to explore in this season, so season three of Future Eyes, was real world use cases. So bringing AI to make people's lives better. But I'm very conscious that I've spent the season two talking about agentic AI and trying to unwrap what agentic means. If I go back to the showcase where we both presented, there were a number of organizations like yourself that were very much a use case, an application of the technology to help in a specific area. There were a few solutions like ours, which was more horizontal agentic capability to do things. I often talk about it in terms of extensibility, being able to kind of extend to do other things. Can you just touch, for those people listening, going, Rob hasn't talked about anything to do with agentic on this episode yet. Can you talk a bit about your the technology of your solution and um, how you see it fitting with broader conversations in the market around like agentic or around sovereign? How do those things impact your product and your roadmap?
So interestingly, we've kind of found that the language of like leading with the language of like, we're using AI agents and whatever doesn't really move the needle forward. So ultimately, and I think this is probably true for most businesses, whether they realize it or not, ultimately, you've got a pain point you're trying to solve and you have the solution. And in a lot of cases, and I'll caveat this in a second, in a lot of cases, the buyer doesn't really care how you've gone about building that solution. They just want their problem solved, right? And so walking into a room saying, I've got this AI agent that can solve your problems is very different to you need to reduce the amount of time that is being spent on casework by 20%, and I've got the solution to solve that. So I think for the most part, we haven't. whilst we've leveraged all of that technology and kind of built our own agents and fine-tuned AI models and all the rest of it, we haven't kind of that's not the thing that we lead with. That being said, I do think that we are in a world where people are in some instances almost framing their problem as we need AI. So, which then means if you then go into a room and say, I've got this AI agentic system, they're like, ah, I will have some of that. So, so that would be my only caveat. And actually, for us, we end up having conversations with those individuals to say, well, why? And really kind of stripping that back to the actual pain point, and building from there. But to go back to your question about our particular solution. So yes, so I think the way that we kind of look at agents as the extent to which you're kind of essentially building a system that can do some kind of decision making and take some kind of action without your input, right? And so we have agentic parts to our product, but the overarching thing is that we always have a human in the loop. So that caseworker is essentially the human in the loop that is managing all of that to then figure out how best to deliver that service. And so that's kind of the approach that we've taken. On the sovereign piece, that's been quite a big one and I think the conversation around that is intensifying. The big thing for us and how that's shown up has been because we are obviously building in kind of quasi and public sectors, the data residency piece has been quite important across different markets as well. So just making sure that we've built the underlying technology to enable us to really switch out across different servers, so that we're making sure that the personal data that's being processed in our system, if we're selling to a UK company, is going to only stay in the UK and that kind of thing. So that's been quite a big one for us.
Cool. Claudine, it's been a pleasure to talk about well, your experience in developing and growing Earlybird. From my point of view, I think the government sector and case handling especially is such a critical space to improve
Mm.
for many reasons. So it's just fantastic to hear about the work that you've been doing. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Rob. I appreciate it.